welcome here to Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora. We are inside the Great Lakes Honda City studios. Great Lakes Honda City coming to you on 7140 Henry Clay Boulevard in Liverpool, New York. They are open for sales and service Monday through Saturday and all the time online at greatlakeshondacity.com. You know, Commissioner Corner is a huge piece of what we do here on Wake Up Call. Over the years, we have literally developed a show within a show, and the whole point of Commissioner Corner is to give the leaders of collegiate athletics across the country, north to south and east to west, the opportunity to have an even playing field to speak on the national topics affecting every conference and league, as well as to speak on the identity of their conference. And what a perfect time to speak on the identity of this conference, as we are within a short window of them changing the name to the Metro, giving us a new look, but keeping that red, white, and blue. And I'm here with the Metro Conference Commissioner, Travis Tellitocci, here with us. And Travis, it is my honor and my privilege. As I told you off the air, I have known about you, known about this conference, respected the conference, and have been waiting to have the opportunity to put a spotlight on my show here on Wake Up Call for the conference. What better time putting all this work in? I said, God's perfect timing, that I didn't do it when it was the MAAC. I get to do it now as you are the Metro. So welcome to the broadcast.
Well, I appreciate you having me. And as you mentioned, this is perfect timing to talk about the MAAC and the Metro.
Yeah. And so for you, I mean, when I talk about obviously my coverage of collegiate basketball across the country, I'm going conference by conference, league by league, and going through each of the tournaments that we have in the postseason that decide the automatic bid. And I found myself over the years saying on my show, the MAAC, not that MAAC, the other MAAC, or I'll say the MAAC, where I'll just give it a little more A to it, because you have the Mid-American, and then you had the Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference, and now you're being, obviously called the Metro. Did you find that to be something too, when people would say the MAAC, and there's the conversation of the MAAC or the MAAC?
Absolutely. I think anytime you have a conversation with somebody and you introduce yourself and you tell them who you are and what you do, you find yourself explaining the name. And, I said it when we did the relaunch. Part of what I think stuck with me during the president's meeting when we met in December in New York City is the designer that was working on the logo said, if you've got 30 seconds to give an elevator pitch on the MAAC, you guys spend the first 15 seconds telling people who you aren't rather than who you are. And that stuck with me during the whole process of, we spent time, to your point, saying that, no, we're the MAAC with two A's. We're the other MAAC. We're the MAAC that doesn't sponsor football. We're the MAAC in the Northeast. So it becomes a negative in a sense and a challenge when you're trying to establish your own identity. And that was a lot of the driving force behind it, is we really need to establish our own identity. And yes, we have 45 years of history, but the confusion was real, and it's something that we wanted to address.
Yeah, and I, like I said, when especially during conference tournament time with basketball, I found myself in that world of the MAAC and the MAAC. You said the 30-second elevator pitch, and I thought I find it funny because I told you off the air I was just teaching a class and teaching high school kids about podcasting, broadcasting, really, bringing something together in the broadcast journalism world. And I said to them, I was like, if you're on an elevator for 2 minutes, you need to have your logo, the name. Yeah, the name has to talk about the logo. The logo has to be suffice without the name. And then your tagline has to also bring it all together. So they all have to have the symmetry. And I gave them an example of Wake Up Call and the sun rising out of the coffee cup and where sports meets life being the tagline. And I said, okay, let's say I have 2 minutes. And then I did it in 30 seconds. So I find it really interesting and kind of ironic that you said when you're talking with the person developing the logo that they told you you have 30 seconds.
Yeah, and again, I think you've got a short window to captivate people's attention. Something that I was talking about with throughout this process with somebody about is, how do you think that it was really never addressed for all these years? And I think that has a lot to do with the advent, obviously, of social media and ESPN Plus now. And you think about selection shows, like we have the most problems probably on those selection shows and in our national broadcast, where people that aren't as familiar maybe with us in the Northeast that are calling our games and seeing us on a regular basis, when they have to say the Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference, they get tripped up. So I think as that exposure has grown over the years, and now every single game that we have in basketball is on ESPN Plus, every selection show is televised, you have social media. I think it's a problem that probably sped up over the years and might not have been an issue in the early 90s or even early 2000s. But it's something that, again, our membership really felt strongly that we needed to do. And, we're excited for the future. We're excited for July 1 when we officially transition over to the Metro.
Yeah, and what I love about this moment for you is the reality of going behind the scenes with you and talking about the journey, right? The iceberg conversation that most people see the tip, but they don't see the majority of the iceberg. They don't see the work. They think, oh, did you just decide within the last couple months or here in 2026 to do this? You took over as the commissioner, only the fourth commissioner in MAAC/Metro history. And when you took over in May 2023 to where we are now, right? These 3 years later, essentially a little over 3 years later, I would imagine that this was a process that's been going on for a long time. How long since taking over in May 2023, how long have you spent on the branding, the messaging, the logo as the commissioner of this conference? Let everybody know what was beneath the water over the years of how long you've truly been working on this.
So the big joke, I think, in the commissioner's world is when somebody gets a commissioner's position, the first two things that they do is they change the logo and they move the office. And I didn't do either one of those coming out of the gate. I think there were other priorities that we had right out of the beginning. And to your question, one of those first priorities for me was membership. And I looked at our membership that at that time was at 11 and felt that coming from the OVC, that was something that we dealt with pretty hard over my time there, towards the end of my time, and we needed to do that right out of the gate. So, we had a media rights negotiation that we had to do. We had to find a home for our basketball tournament. So, logo branding was there from the beginning, but it got put behind some of those other projects. We started our strategic plan in 2023. And that's where a lot of the commentary came in terms of our branding and our identity. We had a lot of focus groups, board of trustees members, alumni, student athletes, faculty members, coaches. And we talked a lot about our brand, a lot about exposure and identity. And it kept coming up over and over again in all of those groups. We did a survey of, that needed to be a priority. So once we got some of those other projects completed, we hit it pretty hard starting last summer. And we had a committee that we worked with, our technology and digital marketing committee, which was led by one of our presidents. We had a couple of ADs and SWA and some of our marketing administrators on that committee. And we started with the name. And that was the first out of the gate, did a lot of testing sessions with, again, a lot of the groups I mentioned. One of the groups that I thought was really important, and we talked about this from the beginning of the interview here, was we put together a group of national media. That's the group that needs to get our name right the most. So they were very helpful in saying one of the things that came out of there was that simplicity lends itself to a clear identity. And, so very helpful in that aspect. We had debated a couple of different names, but ultimately came back to the Metro and the Metro Conference. We talked a lot. There was a Metro Conference back in the day, although that was not the official name of the conference. It was a much longer name that abbreviated down, much in the way that we just did. So once we got past the name, it went into the logo design process. And I would say that was the toughest part of the whole project. When you think about doing rebrands on campus, and I have done one of those on campus, you start with a mascot, you start with colors, and you have a visual identity. Whether it's a fox or a purple eagle or a stag, you're starting with something, and you tell the designer, go make that fox look a little more fierce, change some of those colors, modernize it, and call it a day. We couldn't do that with the conference. You don't have a single identity. You have 13 different schools. So we tried a lot of different things, went through 11 rounds. We looked at buildings, we looked at stars, we looked at symbols, we looked at flames, and we kept feeling that we were forcing something, trying to force something. So we kept coming back to where we started with simplicity. And again, I think when you look at the logo that you'll see, it's very simple, it's bold, it's clear, but that was the whole goal of the project. It wasn't to come up with this crazy name or this crazy logo, and I know some people might be disappointed by that. The goal was simplicity.
Yeah, I think there's beauty in simplicity. And I can say that when your office got back to me about setting up this conversation, it was literally right when the Metro was coming out.
Mhm.
So my response was, I saw it, I reposted it, I liked it, I went into the store, I was looking at, how it was looking on hats and shirts and polos and whatnot. So I do think there's beauty in simplicity. And you're in Edison, New Jersey. And obviously, you're 25 to 27 miles outside of Midtown Manhattan. So I think the other part of Metro, when you talk about the Northeast, is you think about where you are in New Jersey, how you can get places to take this train, utilize this transit and whatnot. So when we're thinking Metro, I'm thinking subway, I'm thinking New Jersey Transit, I'm thinking, the LIRR. Like, I'm thinking of the transportation around the New York, New Jersey area that's going to get me to places outside of utilizing a car or a bus. And so I think to that effect of it all, when I see Metro, I think big, I think populated, I think exciting, I think crowded. So to me, I think when I'm thinking crowded, that's good for the fan base. When I'm thinking about the word Metro and I'm thinking, rail lines and whatnot, I'm thinking accessibility and closeness to these big areas. So I can tell you, and I'd love to get your thoughts, but from my approach to seeing Metro, I'm thinking New York, New Jersey, travel, crowded, exciting, buildings, stuff to do. That's what I see when I see Metro.
Yeah, and we talked a lot about that is how do you tie our identity into obviously our name? And when we started going down the metro route, one of the things that came up is that, well, is Poughkeepsie or Emmitsburg essentially metro? And I think when you look at it at the end of the day, what kept driving us was that when you look at the way that Nielsen uses designated market areas, almost all of our schools are located in the top areas, to your point, in the country, whether that's New York City or Boston or Philadelphia. Poughkeepsie might be an hour and a half outside of Manhattan, but it's still in the New York City designated market area. Same with Fairfield, same with Sacred Heart. You have Buffalo. So you are all surrounded, our schools are surrounded by these metro areas. I think we were trying to be careful as we designed the logo not to make it look like it was essentially New York City, right? You didn't want to tie it to one geographic location for obvious reasons. I mean, conference realignment, we know, continues. I think everybody has experienced that with numbers, right? When we've got Big Ten and Pac-12 and Big 12, that those essentially don't exist anymore. So you take all kinds of things into consideration when you're designing, and we didn't want an Empire State Building in there that would tie us to one essential area, because we do have schools obviously outside of that region. But you're right. I think, when you hear the word metro, you think of tough, you think of gritty, you think of crowded, you think of on the move, right? Transit, transportation. So I think the simplicity will give us good flexibility to do different things on merchandise and awards and with championship logos, and not having that busy logo necessarily to tie us down.
Yeah, I think there's a lot. I mean, and I deal with this world. I mean, name, image, and likeness of building my company, my brand, my logos, who I am, what I'm about, the different shows I do, and how there's me that tethers them all together. What does that personality look like? Because I'm selling myself as a brand. So I see the Metro, and I'm just seeing things like when a team's doing really well and you got multiple bids in a tournament, ride the Metro. I'm just seeing, kind of ride that wave type of feeling. I mean, and essentially what I'm saying to you is, what can I do to be an outside advisor to be able to work with this thing? Because honestly, Travis, all jokes aside, in a world where there's so much conversation that we're just inundated with money and individual and the portal and all this negative stuff. We're like how are we going to afford this? How are we going to, handle this? Why are there no parameters around that? Is Congress involved? Are they not involved? With all of those things going on that become like a giant headache to a commissioner, and it's just like, can we just live in the world of the student athlete? Why are we doing all this ancillary stuff? At this time, with all that going on and all the craziness and the chaos, you doing this rebranding gives you an opportunity to say, yeah, all that's going on, but we're going to give you something positive, unique. We're going to reach out to our institutions. We're going to show them how dedicated we are to them. And we're going to build an identity within this. We're going to be in the eye of the storm where it's the quietest. And we're going to look at the chaos around us, but we're going to hone in on a spotlight that's positive. And I love the fact that amidst all of the crazy, you decided to do something positive, unique, structured, focused. And I think that you can really tell your membership, we're going to control our message and we're going to be a positive thing in a world that's been kind of multi-layered to the point where it's suffocating at times.
Well, and I'll give you a great example. We use student athletes throughout this process quite a bit. And even when we were deciding whether to call ourselves a conference or a league, it was unanimous by the student athletes. They were the one group that kept saying, you have to stay conference. Conference feels more powerful, more legit. And but the one thing that I had a coach text me yesterday, and he had a recruit on campus, and his mother, the recruit's mother said, how do you pronounce the name of your conference? Because again, it was still Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference. And the student athlete said back to the mom, well, Mom, it's just the Metro now. I would play in the Metro. And the coach said, for the first time, I didn't have to explain the name to somebody to say, we're not the Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference. We're not that other MAAC. And this student athlete just happened to be from the Midwest. So the confusion was there. Yeah. So it was refreshing to hear that story. I think to your point, in a world where you have all of this chaos, us trying to, again, reinforce that we've got a lot of good things happening in this conference, and we need an identity to back that up, not to discard the history and tradition from the last 45 years. That was really important to us throughout this process of how are we going to keep that. But it's how do we move forward in this crazy landscape and distinguish ourselves among everybody else?
Yeah, and like you said, I mean, distinguishing yourself, owning your message, as we alluded to, there is a lot of chaos going on. And, this commissioner corner years ago when I created this, again, it was the opportunity to bond the leagues and the conferences in putting you all, essentially giving you a seat at the table here on the show. And I said, if the NCAA doesn't do it or no other place does it where you truly feel like everyone has an equal seat, let it be my show where every conference commissioner or executive director feels that their league and their conference is equally represented, not more or less than anybody else. And so in this national collegiate sports world that we're living in today, we have the transfer portal. We're trying to get parameters around it. We have NIL. We're trying to get parameters around it. We have the House settlement, the race settlement, a bunch of settlements going on, trying to get parameters around it. We have a presidential executive order, which people don't understand is not law. It's more of a framework, but it's not like President Trump signed it and now the NCAA has to do it. So there's all of these elements that are going on right now. As a commissioner, how are you tackling this world that's affecting every conference, every league in Division I athletics? Because this is a universal thing that's happening right now, and it's affecting your desk like it's affecting anybody else's desk. So how do you look at these national topics and the fact that it seems like we're only adding more things, we're not taking things away?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I've always been of the mindset that you try to control what you can control. And I think, for us, we've tried to have a seat at the table and engaged in some congressional engagement activities, which has been very helpful. I had the opportunity to speak to Senator Cruz's staff and Senator Cantwell's staff in the fall, and trying to give them our perspective from a mid-major, and they were very great in listening. And I think the biggest problem we have in this league right now is that the revenue share marketplace, it just continues to escalate at a pace that I think is disconnected from performance. We're seeing student athletes being offered significant amount of money, and I think our coaches get frustrated because in some cases the production and competition isn't really matching the numbers that are being discussed. I think you saw that if you watched the hearing yesterday, the congressional hearing with Coach Saban's example of, in his first year it was 2.7 million, then it went to 7 million, then 10, 17, 24, and now it's 40. That's a football example, but we're dealing with the same issue on the basketball side. So yeah. I think the size of these offers is really forcing some student athletes to make difficult decisions. Mm-hmm. I think what happens that you see from our seat is that not every opportunity turns out what it appears to be on the surface, that some student athletes are leaving good situations where they're thriving only to find that, that financial opportunity might not have fully materialized, or their playing time isn't there. So I think that's the frustration amongst our coaches, amongst our administrators. And again, I think we try to control what we can control. If you look at our basketball side, we lost every single person on the men's side on the first team, second team, and third team. And at the end of the day, nobody's going to feel bad for us. Everybody's coming into that same situation and dealing with that same situation. And what I've told our membership is that we can spend our time complaining, or we can focus on trying to navigate it and find solutions. So I think what we've continued to say from the conference level is we need to make sure that the resources that are being invested by our institutions, that every dollar that we spend is being used in the most strategic and effective way possible. And that's what we try to focus on, not all the noise around us.
Yeah, like you said, control the controllables. And I mean, that becomes more and more clear over the years. The first time it was said in front of me, it has only built like a snowball since then. Here in this Commissioner Corner on Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora, inside the Great Lakes Honda City studios, we are here with Metro Conference Commissioner Travis Tellitocci here. And Travis, as we look at some of these pieces, I know, we've discussed, what Nick Saban's been saying and whatnot. Different leaders have different thoughts on let's involve Congress. Let's ask the national government to help us. Let's not do this state by state, conference by conference. Let's have like a universal place where we can go, a check and balance to the NCAA, even if you will. How do you look at this? Is this, you want the NCAA to take the reins and really create an identity to all of this stuff and parameters and concrete rules that every conference has to have, a floor and a ceiling? Do you want Congress to take it over? Do you want it to be led by state governments, and wherever your conference's headquarters is, that New Jersey is going to be a certain way? So, okay, we're in New Jersey and Edison, so we're going to lean on that. Is this an NCAA thing? Is it a national government? Is it a state government? Is it, hey, we're the Metro, everybody leave us alone and treat us like a privately owned company? How do you view the right way to go about rules and regulations from here?
Well, I think, for me, I boil it down to one simple thing is we have rules. Do you want to follow them or not? I think that's the question that has to be answered. And I don't care if you're at the CSC, the NCAA, the federal government, is there are rules that have been outlined, and do you want to follow them or not? I think is at the core. And, over the past year and a half, there's been a ton of time and money developing rules through a system with the CSC, and we're in year one of that. And I know that was a Herculean effort, but again, at the end of the day, we can't get to a space where the Power Four conferences are signing the participation agreement. So I think it goes back to what's the end game here? What do we want out of all of this? And in my sense, in my seat where I sit from the mid-major level and with 13 institutions, I think, again, it's not cliche, but our mission is to provide opportunities for student athletes. Yes, we want to be competitive. Yes, we want to have success, but it's about more than that. It's about graduation, it's about academics, and it's about service. So I know what our core mission is. I think we're fine following the rules and we're fine doing things the right way. When you start to talk about, to your question of, where do you want this to go? I think you can't operate a system, a national system, when you have so many different state laws. I think that was the biggest issue that we had to deal with right out of the gate. When you have attorney generals making decisions state by state, that we all know that's not sustainable. So I think that's number one that has to get cleaned up. On the NCAA side, I do like the age-based eligibility model. I think that's obviously going to happen and be implemented here probably shortly. I know there's still some things that need to be worked out, but I think we're going in the right direction there. I think the other things are too far gone, and nobody wants to say that, we need Congress to save us, but I think so many things are so far gone that we probably do need some help there. And there's some simple things that people agree on. Agents, I think, a big issue, right? That there has to be some sort of regulation on agents. The patchwork of state laws, which we talked about, everybody agrees that that's not sustainable. I think where you get into the tricky part is the employment issue. I will tell you the single thing that would eliminate opportunities for our student athletes on our campuses would it be if every single student athlete becomes an employee. Our student athletes continually talk about that in our meetings, that that's not what they want, that's not what they signed up for. But again, I do think that at some degree, and maybe that's at the FBS football level, that the money has gotten so big that you probably do need to look at a different model there. So how do you approach the employment issue, I think, is a big question. It's not currently addressed in the bill that Senator Cruz and Cantwell put out. So I think that is something that everybody's going to have to put together their heads on and figure it out. But I think those are really the big issues that need to be addressed. But again, I come back to where I started, Dan, is do people want to follow the rules or don't they?
Well, and I think, I love the point that you made, because whoever is the ruling body, if you're not treating everybody the same, holding everybody to, if you break this rule, then this is the punishment for everyone. If you're punishing some, not others, if you're punishing some differently than others, that is the true problem. And it doesn't matter if it's federal government, the NCAA, state government, the conference itself or the league itself. I love that you made that point. What's the point of having rules if they're not enforced, or if they're not enforced equally? So you said you like the 5-and-5. So that essentially, because we're seeing the NCAA is losing all these lawsuits, right? You have Chambliss, who applies for a 6th year of eligibility. The NCAA says no. And then he goes to his state and says, okay, in Mississippi, let's file and let's go against this. And then Mississippi says, you're good to go. And then the NCAA fights it, and the NCAA loses it. And now here he is in his 6th year. We've seen a player in their 11th year. We've seen a tight end in their 9th year. I mean, at this point, they should be doctors twice over. So the 5-and-5, where you either start your collegiate timetable, your time frame, when it comes to you turning 19 years old or when you graduate high school, and then you have 5 to play 5. We have 4 years of eligibility right now. This takes away redshirting outside of you having leave for maternity. Unless it's maternity leave, it's religious vocation, or it's military, you got 5 to play 5. So this will give student athletes an extra year of eligibility, and hopefully take away applying for 6 and 7 years and so on and so forth. You said you like that. You like the 5-and-5, the age-based, which provides more time to be a college athlete. What do you like about it? And do you think that this can help us alleviate the issue if we say to someone, hey, you got 5 years. You can go out here and play an extended period of time and gain more time than anybody's ever had before you on a basic model, not a model where you have to apply for a waiver or a medical red shirt. What are your thoughts on why you like this?
I like it because there's a window, and I like it because we won't have 28, 27, 26 year olds playing against 18-year olds. And that's what essentially we've moved to here. So there's guardrails there. Every single organization, if you think about it, from Little League Baseball to high school to the professionals, have some sort of age limit or parameters of when you can enter the draft, or you graduate from Little League to Pony, or whatever that may be in terms of high school and the way that looks. I tore my ACL my junior year of high school playing basketball. I didn't get another year from the West Virginia Collegiate or the High School Athletic Association. It didn't exist. So I think that's why the extra year, the fifth year, will hopefully help with some of those situations where people have injuries or have circumstances that they're dealing with. So they've got that extra year now built in, but we need some guardrails there. And in the current format, it's the Wild West with the waivers and the exceptions. There's an exception, we know, to every rule. So
Yeah.
I think if this is going to work, that you mentioned the different exceptions, the religious, the military service, pregnancy. I mean, those are very narrow exceptions. And if this is going to work, those exceptions have to stay narrow, or we're going to end up right back to where we are. So to me, I think it gives us guardrails. It makes competition fair, that again, we're not competing 18-year-olds against 28-year-olds. I was just reading a story earlier today about a 28-year-old punter on the field. So you start to scratch your head a little bit and think, how did we get to this point? There were a lot of errors along the way, but I do think that we're starting to move in the right direction here.
Yeah, I mean, I never thought I'd see a day where a G League professional player all of a sudden is playing college. I mean, it's a very strange, slippery, and dangerous slope. The portal, you made mention of the fact you said our first, second, and third team for the conference, everyone is gone. So the executive order from President Donald J. Trump states that it's essentially bonding the old with the new. It's bonding the transfer, what the transfer rule was before, where if you're going to transfer, you have to sit out a year. And it's bonding it with the Wild Wild West, where it's free agency every year. So they're saying, hey, the first time you transfer, you can go anywhere and play right away. But every time after that, you're sitting out a year to hopefully prevent 4 schools in 4 years, 5 schools in 4 years. I think one person had like 11 schools in 5 years because you commit and decommit and all this stuff. So, what are your thoughts on that? If we were to take the executive order and implement it across the NCAA, is this enough to try and put a fence around the horses to keep them in the stable, to say the first time transfer, immediate play, every time after that, sit out a year, to hopefully try and keep more out of the portal in an effort that they get an education? Because and I know, if you go to 4 schools in 4 years, you're not going to graduate because the credits aren't going to all translate over. So does the executive order of one play right away, everything after sit out a year, do you think that that is enough to try and get this thing back in the bottle?
Well, you just hit the nail on the head with graduation. And again, I go back to what I said earlier, is if our goal at the end of the day is to make sure that these student athletes graduate, in our league, how many of them are turning pro? A very, very, very tiny percent, less than 1%. And I think you would equate that across the board. So if we're setting them up for success, we want to make sure that they graduate, and if they're not playing professional sports, which most of them aren't, that they have a clear path towards a career. So I think it all comes back to that for me. When we spent the last few weeks looking at the data from this past year in terms of basketball and looking at transfers, and what you begin to see is those student athletes on their third or fourth school, that success is not translated over to the court. And obviously, there's going to be an uphill battle there for that student athlete to graduate. I think the other thing you're going to see, Dan, is over the next couple of years, these graduation rates are going to start to come out, and they're going to start to catch up to this transfer portal era. And those are not going to look good at all, right? So I think that's when the lid might be blown off of this whole thing. So I think a couple of things. Number one, if you're a student athlete that has committed and graduated, then yeah, you should be able to go wherever you want. And we have that all the time where you've got seniors who have graduated and have that year of eligibility. You fulfilled your commitment. You should be able to go wherever you want after that. I do think there has to be some sort of guardrails on there to protect student athletes that they are not on their fourth institution and fourth years as well. It's not sustainable. It's not good for anybody at that point. So, yeah, I think there's some good things in the current bill, obviously, and President Trump's executive order addresses that as well. I think the NCAA clearing up the age-based eligibility model. Now we've got to solve this transfer issue that has completely gotten out of control. And resulted in a lot of lawsuits, right? And that's what, you mentioned the earlier example of the quarterback. Essentially we are creating issues for ourselves in those scenarios where, now the lawsuit's filed and the NCAA spends the money defending itself, which is all coming out of revenue that could go back to the institutions and the conferences to help do some better things rather than continue to run up legal bills.
Well, into the House settlement and the race settlement, more recently, speaking with leaders around the country in Commissioner Corner here on Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora inside the Great Lakes Honda City Studios, they said something that is not commonplace knowledge, which is that the autonomy group, like you said, these four conferences making decisions for everybody, the autonomy group of the Big Ten, the Big 12, the SEC, and the ACC, when the House settlement comes about and the NCAA says, we're going to agree to pay X amount of dollars, we're going to do this and do that, what's not commonplace knowledge is the fact that it's affecting revenue to your conference, to conferences all across America. I spoke with the Big Sky commissioner, and Tom Wistersill said to me, 15% of our income gone because of these settlements that the NCAA is going through. I'd love for you to go a little bit deeper into that and what people don't know, that all this stuff that's going on, even in rooms that the Metro is not sitting in, is affecting the bank account of the Metro and your ability to have the revenue that you had in the past. So what the NCAA is fighting and settling on is actually affecting the entire country.
So I'll give you a little peek behind the curtain of our conference. Our assessment of the House settlement is $3.2 million a year over 10 years. So that's a $320 million bill over that decade of the House settlement. You mentioned the race settlement, which is the volunteer assistant coaches case that was just settled this past year. That's a $300+ million settlement, which equates to $1.5 million for the MAAC over 3 years. So this year, as we're receiving our distributions, those are being reduced by $4.7 million. And oh, by the way, all of our institutions have to pay to opt into the House settlement and the costs that are associated with the cap management program and NIL Go. So when you add all of that together, that's a $5 million hit to the conference and its member institutions. Now, we've been very fortunate to have success in basketball over the past couple of years with St. Peter's run to the Elite Eight and earning those units, and Mount St. Mary's win in the first four, back in 2025 and earning those units. But essentially, that money starts to evaporate due to these settlements. So again, I go back to a lot of the funds that are coming that you could earmark to do some pretty great things are now being sent, as part of litigation. And my fear is that as we keep going along here, if it's $4.7 million now, what's the next hit? And are we going to be able to sustain that body blow if it comes in the form of another $1 million plus settlement?
So then the question becomes, you're a conference that doesn't sponsor football. Mm-hmm. Do you believe that the right place to go is to have the autonomy group either break away as those four conferences, which now have 18, 16, and 16. But if you look at the ACC for football, you got to take Notre Dame out of it. So You have 18 and 17 there, which is 35. And then you have 32 with the other two. So that's 67 conferences. Do you believe, with almost 70 involved in FBS football, just amongst those four conferences, is there a world where the FBS has to detach itself in all 10 of those conferences? Is it the A4? How do we lighten the financial blow, and how do we sustain Division I athletics at the NCAA level? Does it need to be a separation of the A4 or a separation completely of the FBS?
Well, I think you got to be careful because the easy answer that everybody wants to say is that, the Power Four should just break away. And I don't think that's necessarily true in the sense that, all of the revenue that I'm talking about here from the NCAA is a result of the men's basketball championship, right? The men's basketball tournament. So I think you've got to be careful in the sense that if that is what is funding, obviously a lot of initiatives across all of our 32 conferences, that breakaway would obviously impact those distributions. So I think it's very easy to say that as an answer, but where are you making up that revenue distribution if there is no more national men's basketball tournament? I don't think you can per se. So I think though there comes a risk tolerance with that as well. And I just mentioned the $4.7 million. Now the volunteer coaches settlement, obviously our schools were part of that as well with the volunteer coaches. I think every institution was. So, the House settlement, I think probably plays more to the FBS football realm. But again, I think the argument will be that we reap the benefits of some of those funds through basketball as well. So I don't think it's an easy answer to say that, the Power Four should just break away or this should happen and it only should be football that breaks away. I think, easier said than done in a lot of ways. What happens to the House settlement if that happens, and where does that liability go? What's the NCAA's role in this whole thing? We talk quite a bit about what a world would look like with conference realignment and trying to imagine what the world might look like in 5 years if there was some separation. So you're constantly trying to think of different scenarios, which I wish we wouldn't have to do constantly. I wish there was more stability and we could spend our time thinking about other things and ways to continue to improve our conference and help student athletes. But that's the reality of the situation right now. So I think it's a little harder than just saying, you know what, everybody should break away and all our problems will be solved. I don't think that's the case at all.
Yeah. I think there's some predictions that I've made from 2021 to now and ones I made before that I did not want to come true. And one of them was over 8 years ago, I said 5 to 10 years from now, if the NCAA keeps going in the direction they're going, they will either look completely different or they'll fail to exist. I feel like we're in a place with that and the CSC and different things that are going on right now. I said in 2021 that I could see a world where the SEC breaks away and forms their own league. And then I updated that and I said, with the Big Ten taking 4 West Coast schools from the PAC, that they have coast to coast, north to south, so many major players that the only thing that they don't have, the only part of the country is like Idaho, Arizona, Wyoming. So I saw that world of them breaking away. And then most recently with the Protect College Sports Act, they didn't put out conference statements. They put out a joint conference statement showing me even more that that could be a reality. So the question that I asked for the Metro and for you, Travis, is if these predictions could come to reality, if some of this could come to fruition, we look at the expansion of the NCAA tournament. Let's say that we keep these 30-plus conferences together. Let's say that March Madness is March Madness. The expansion of the men's and women's Division I tournaments from 68 to 76 means nothing if conferences like your conference don't have the opportunity for more representation. If it's just taking more schools from certain conferences, it doesn't benefit anybody. It essentially becomes like 2 or 3 conferences fighting for a national championship. So do you believe that the 68 to 76, the model of 12 play-in games, having West Coast play-in games and play-in games still in Dayton, Ohio, the model that we see, do you believe that the expansion to 76 will provide more opportunity for places like the Metro? And was this the right move to make moving forward?
I think there's pros and cons to the decision. If you look at all of this, Dan, I think the one thing that you come back to, and whether it's conference realignment or 76 teams, bigger is not always better, right? And I think we've gotten to the point where we're trying to get, more revenue, more schools, more everything. And nothing I've seen so far in my 3 years as commissioner that bigger has equated to solving a lot of issues per se. I think when you talk about 76 teams, we're a conference that traditionally has been what would now be in that opening round is a 16, a 15, one of the higher 14s. We just spent the last week at our spring meetings looking at those metrics and where we would fall in line with that. So, we've been the beneficiary, as I mentioned last year, with Mount St. Mary's playing in the first four, earning units there. Without those units, I think we'd be in a much different situation with $4.7 million reduction. So again, I think there's some benefit there. However, as commissioner, my goal is to not be in that opening round. I think for our schools, it's how do we position ourselves to be a 12, be a 13. That's easier said than done in this landscape. When you're talking about NIL, when you're talking about schools buying games, when you're talking about, guarantee games being used to fund some of that NIL budget, when you start to put all of those different variables together, it gets very hard to become a 12 or a 13 seed. So, if you are in that opening round, I think you've got to do the best to position yourselves to be able to win that game. You start looking at conference schedule, and this is the discussion we had last week in Lake George. Is 20 the right number of conference games? Should it be higher? Should it be lower? What does our conference tournament format look like? Right now that we're set up with 10 teams, and the 1 seed is playing the winner of the 8-9 game, the 2 seeds playing the number of the 7-10 game. Does that make sense anymore? Or should the 1 and 2 be rewarded more to position us better? Then you go back to, well, we've got an unbalanced schedule. So is that fair if somebody's not playing each other, 4 times twice? So there's a lot of different things that you try to consider. And I can't sit here and tell you if 76 is good or bad, because I think there's pros and cons to it. What I hope for, and I've been assured by the NCAA, is that experience of the opening round is going to look exactly like the first and second rounds for our student athletes, for our coaches, and from a media standpoint, so that I don't want it to be viewed as a play-in round per se, where you see that in some other sports and it's not really being in the tournament. So I think the NCAA has got to do a good job of how they market that and really think about what that opening round looks like. Again, I just don't think bigger is always better per se.
Well, and I was going to ask you that because with now having 12 of these first round games, so to speak, 6 of them are automatic bid conference champions and 6 of them are at large. And I have long since been a proponent of, if there's 30 plus conferences and everybody plays a conference tournament, including the Ivy League, who instituted it over the last few years, then if you're a conference champion and you get an automatic bid, is an automatic bid really an automatic bid if you're not in the round of 64? So my question to you is, and you said the NCAA has assured you this is, this is going to be first round. It's not going to be like this is all play in and then here we go to 64. Should conference champions be locked into the round of 64? Should any conference champion be trying to get into the round of 64, or do you think that that's a mistake?
I think there should be some distinction for conference champions. And I think to your point, I'm not naive to sit here and think that we just expanded the tournament by 8 teams and we're going to get an at-large bid. I think we all know where those at-larges are going to go for the most part. So I think from a conference tournament standpoint, yeah, I think there should be some weight to that. I was with Mount St. Mary's last year when they beat, American and Dayton, and, you're leaving there on Tuesday night or Wednesday. I can't remember which day it was at this point, but, you get on the tarmac after that game, which is probably at 11:30 at night. You sit there for an hour because there's a thunderstorm and you can't take off. You fly over to Charlotte, which is not a very long flight, but by the time you land, it's 3 in the morning, 3:30 in the morning. You check into the hotel, you get your keys set. Now you're talking about 4 o'clock in the morning, and they've got to go to practice the next day. So there is definitely a disadvantage of playing in that opening round from a travel and rest standpoint, that you're getting somebody that is already at the location and is sleeping a full probably 8 to 10 hours while you're traveling and jet setting across the country trying to get to your destination. So you're already at a disadvantage there, whether you won $2 million or not. If the goal is, again, to continue to advance in the next round of the tournament and go to the second round, the Sweet 16, the Elite Eight, and the Final Four, you're already behind the eight ball there.
Yeah, and it's a great point being brought up here by you, and well taken here. I will say this, though, that with being a 16 seed, Siena, and someone who I've known since 2008, Jerry McNamara, obviously he represented my hometown with a national championship and did a tremendous job at Siena, and now is back in my hometown of Syracuse, New York. Jerry was within 2 possessions playing 6 guys against the number 1 overall seed, Duke. So we've already seen what your conference, the Metro, can do historically. And before we jump into our final piece, I do want to make note of this, is that looking at your members, Canisius, Fairfield, Iona, Manhattan, Marist, Merrimack, Mount St. Mary's, Niagara, Quinnipiac, Ryder, Sacred Heart, St. Peter's, and Siena, looking at these institutions, as well as having associate members that have included LaSalle, Long Island University, Villanova, Virginia Military Institute, and Wagner, when we look at those pieces, as well as Drake, Jacksonville, LIU, Robert Morris, and Stetson, when we talk about women's rowing with those teams starting with Drake, and then before that, women's water polo, University at Albany, a member in women's golf. So we do have these associate members in women's athletics, and then you have your 13 core. You added Merrimack and you added Sacred Heart recently, coming from the NEC. What have they done for the strength of your conference, and what can you say about your 13 member institutions and how you would define the Metro moving forward?
Yeah, I think I mentioned this earlier. I was 3 months into the job when we added Merrimack and Sacred Heart, and I felt that was really important with, again, living conference realignment pretty hard in the OVC, that you don't know if you're going to lose members from the top or maybe even the bottom in some cases. So I felt it was really necessary to make sure that we were strong from a membership standpoint. 13 is the highest number of members that we've ever been at in terms of a conference. I think what both of those institutions brought to the table and why they were so attractive is because they are schools that see the importance of Division I athletics, and they're investing in it. And I think from a commissioner's standpoint, that's probably the best that you can ask for, that you've got schools that are willing to invest, whether that's into revenue share, facilities, scholarships, coaching. That makes a big difference. And I think it helps raise the bar, not only with those 2 members, but across the board. So if you look at it, they've done very well so far in the MAAC. Merrimack with basketball in the championship game this year has done an excellent job on the men's basketball side. The women's basketball side was in the postseason. From an Olympic sports standpoint, have obviously been competitive. Sacred Heart, in men's lacrosse, and have won in other Olympic sports as well. So I think they've helped raise the bar, and that's something that, from our seat as commissioners, that you never stop thinking about conference realignment and how do you continue to get stronger, but also being realistic, I think. And we talked a lot about what's wrong with college athletics right now. And I think one of the biggest pieces that's wrong is that we've gone away from regionality. And any member that we're going to add is going to be a drive from another member. And I think that's really important, that we're not, taking a plane to go play a women's soccer game or a volleyball match or a lacrosse match in the middle of the week. That That's something that I feel really strongly about. And I think we've lost that in college athletics, which has really hurt. When you spend money on travel, you don't get that back. It's not a facility, it's not a scholarship. You're not investing in people, you're investing in getting it from point A to point B. So, Merrimack, Sacred Heart have been great additions. I think with our rebrand, we're constantly trying to raise the bar in the conference, continuing to move forward. And I think we just want to show that we have a lot to offer here in the conference, and we're excited about the future.
And what I love about it is, as I'm reading off those 13 full members of the Metro Conference, there's symmetry, there's connection. It makes sense too, like you said, being a conference that cares about your footprint and cares about your travel. There are some conferences who play conference matchups that are 2,600 miles apart. So,
Well, you just set a line, when we went through our strategic plan and you talk about what unites us all, and we're all private schools.
yeah,
We are very similar in terms of mission, but it kept coming back, and you just said the line is we make sense geographically, academically, from a mission standpoint, we make sense. And I think that's what we've lost in college athletics is you've got some combinations that don't make sense anymore.
amen to that. Well, I'll tell you something that makes sense to me, and it's the final thing that we'll do here, Travis. Commissioners never get to ask questions. You always get asked the question. So I'm going to do something here on the show that we call rapid fire, and I flip the script. I don't know broadcasters besides me that do this, but I'm going to let you put me on the hot seat. You get a trio of questions. Use them wisely because you never get to ask questions. It could be any topic, doesn't have to be sports, whatever you want. But you have 3 questions to ask me, and I have to answer them.
Okay, well, I'm not prepared for this, so I'm going to have to go off the cuff. I
Yeah.
think my first question would be, and I guess it can't be a two-parter, but what do you see as the biggest issue right now in college athletics, and what solution would you provide to fix it? It's kind of a two-parter.
Yeah, I would say, and I appreciate the question, I would say the biggest issue is we have created an individualistic society where we're playing team sports but focused on the individual. We are putting ourselves in situations where you have 2 guards on the team that don't both want to bring the ball up the floor, and you have a law office that's giving NIL to one, and you have a dealership that's giving NIL to the other as an example, and then you choose a starter. And Siena says, here's our starting point guard. Well, guess what? The law office didn't get the starting point guard, so now they want to pull their money because they don't want commercials with the backup guy. And now these 2 guys are fighting with each other because you just cost me money. Now it's not about being on a team. So I would say we have to address the issue that we said it would never be pay for play, but essentially the House settlement and these revenues, we are pay for play. When you opt in and you got to spend a certain amount of money and you can spend up to this amount, we are essentially paying athletes, which makes them employees, which means that they can be fired. And that's what some of these student athletes aren't understanding is if you're 4 weeks into the season and you're not the forward that I thought you were, I could take your money, take your scholarship, and kick you out of my school because you're an employee. You got fired because you're costing me money and time, and you're not what I thought you were. So I think there's a dangerous road of getting away from academics and getting away and putting themselves in an employee type of model. And when it's all about the money, nothing good comes from that. Money is the root of all evil. So I would say we have to get parameters around name, image, and likeness. We have to have caps. We have to have some type of a salary cap, and there has to be a window that we work with the 30 plus conferences to say, if you're a conference that could spend, $60 million a piece per school, and you're a conference that could spend 3, you're going to keep poaching our players, and we're going to do all the work for you, and you're going to keep stealing these people. So I would say we have to get parameters. We can't have it be pay for play. We can never have employees when it comes to the student athlete model, and we should have incentivized NIL, which has to do with class attendance, grades, and graduation rates.
Good answer. So my next question would be, and I've thought a lot about this question and curious to get your perspective on it. I started my career in professional sports at the New York Mets, and
Okay.
that was back in 2004. And I was there for a few seasons. And I think the entire time I was there, there was no debate about what the goal was. It was to win the World Series. It was to make money. Obviously, you've got a bottom line, but it was pretty clear what the expectations were, right? As I look at college athletics, and I've transitioned over, after that to a college campus, where it started and where it's at now over that 20-year span is completely different. And I feel like it's gone and swung probably worse than professional sports. So my question is, I think everybody knew the end game in professional sports. Like I said, win the World Series, win the Super Bowl, win the Stanley Cup. What's the end game in college athletics? All this positioning, you talk about super leagues, and that's the word of the week, it seems like, coming out of the congressional hearings. But as I look at the SEC, the Big Ten, and the Power Four, and even us, like, what is the end game in all of this? And I guess you could throw the NCAA into that as well.
The end game should have been, and should be right now, should always be, and should have been in the past, that we want to provide an experience for student athletes where they get to play the sport that they love, but they fully understand that less than 1% of them will ever play professionally. So we need to have the end. Yes, you want to win a championship. Yes, you want to have accolades and you want to be the MVP and you want to get the most out of it and stay healthy and score a bunch of points and have a ton of fun. But ultimately, if we're not building good young men and women that are going to contribute well to society, that are going to get an education, that are going to have something to fall back on when their playing days are over, that are going to understand how to live life and be a member of society, contributing member of society, a good parent, a good spouse, we have to lean on the fact that we need to teach them. We have to teach them beyond the game. Everybody wants to win a championship, but my best coaches, I didn't necessarily win a championship. The championship that I won in our summer league in basketball, I don't even remember my coach's name. But then there's other times where, the coach I remember is the coach I had when I was JV basketball, and I didn't think he liked me, and I didn't think he saw any value in me. And then I ended up and then we elevated to varsity. I had a different coach. That coach, every time I was on the floor, he was in the stands, and he would go, "Danny, when you get the ball, shoot it, shoot it, shoot it." Every time I came down the floor, "Danny, shoot. Why aren't you shooting? Danny, look at me." He grabbed my pants when I was close enough to the side, grabbed my shorts, tugged on my shorts, and he goes, "Hey, shoot it." And so I will never forget his faith and belief in me. And I also will never forget the worst coach I ever had. And I've also been on teams, like I said, where I won a championship and don't even remember what the coach looked like. So we have to be remembering what college is for. You're at home with mom and dad or your guardian or your grandparents. They're taking care of you when you're a kid. Then there's the real world. The bridge in between is college, where you're in the real world, but you're not. You're given the opportunity for some more personal responsibility and accountability, but there's still protection around you. And without having the bridge of college, we're taking you from someone's taking care of you to you're taking care of yourself 100%. And if we take them and if we take them away from mom and dad and throw them into the world with no bridge in between to give them the healthy balance, how are we going to create a society of people that know how to live?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. We've really lost sight of what the end game should be, right? And I feel like we've gone more towards people wanting complete domination over everything, whether that's not just on the field or on the court, but that's on TV and everywhere in between. So I think we've lost sight of what that end game should be. My last question on a lighter note is, I'm sure you've interviewed a lot of interesting people over the years, and I'm sure you've got a list of people that you would love to interview. So who are the top 3 people that you have not interviewed yet that would be on your list to speak to? Across any, doesn't have to be college athletics, but who would you want to interview, the top 3?
Great question. Nick Saban, Michael Jordan, and Nick Saban, Michael Jordan. Nick Saban because arguably the greatest ever. And I think he truly cares about the future of athletics. Michael Jordan, who I've been in the same room with a couple times, but Michael Jordan, because I do consider him the greatest ever. And when people
A little
tell
more
me,
quiet though. He's a little quiet.
yeah, he is, but I would say I like the challenge of being able to get somebody to feel comfortable and safe and
Sure.
talk because they are. And I mean, I could tell you this, we've been talking for over an hour and I feel like we're in our first 15 minutes. I looked at the time here and I was like, oh my goodness. So I would say, getting Michael Jordan to open up. And then kind of in that same vein, I would say I would love the opportunity to speak with Mike Tyson because
Mm.
I don't know if anyone has ever told his story where he felt like he was safe and he could breathe. I feel like his story has always been we're gonna write the story and then force you to answer and you're the villain, as opposed to, do we actually know who Mike Tyson is and who he was as a child? And I would love the opportunity to allow Mike to be emotional, honest, real, and to, for once in his life, not think that someone's just trying to force him into an angle.
Yeah, those are three great ones. We have our basketball championships at Boardwalk Hall in Atlantic City. A ton of history there, and a ton of photos on the wall of Mike Tyson. Some very famous fights there, and you forget. And I remember this. When I worked at the Mets, going to the Garden one time for one of those big boxing matches, and what spectacles those used to be, right? So every time I'm in Boardwalk Hall, I'm reminded what boxing used to mean at some point in time.
Yeah, no, I mean, 100%. I mean, Mike Tyson was the guy. So the most
Yeah.
important question is the closer here on this commissioner corner with Travis Tellitocci here of the Metro Conference, their commissioner and leader here on Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora inside the Great Lakes Honda City Studios. And you led me into it by talking about Atlantic City. So my question to you is, do I get credentialed to come see the Metro when we have these basketball tournaments coming up? That's my one question going straight to the commissioner of this is, do I get to see this firsthand? And secondly, can you make sure a piece of Metro gear falls off the truck that I can rock, that I can either rock or put in the studio?
Absolutely. Send me your size. We'll make sure that happens. Atlantic City, yes, you should definitely come and experience it. I think it's a good spot for us. As I mentioned, the building has tremendous history. Where else can you be in a venue where you walk out the front door, you're on the boardwalk, and you walk right into the sand and the ocean? I mean, it's a really unique setup. It's a great destination.
Yeah.
The hotels are really good. There's a lot of entertainment. So I would definitely invite you to come down and experience. What we found is when people get there and experience the tournament, they have nothing but positive things to say about it.
No, and I'm looking at it here in the studio. I mean, the building in and of itself just screams history. So,
Absolutely. Two WrestleManias there. I mentioned prize fights, indoor. I mean, they played a bowl game in that building back in the day. So it has been host to obviously Miss America over that many year span, a ton of history, and I think a good spot for our conference championship.
so two good answers. Commissioner said, yes, come down and he'll make something falls off the truck. Make sure it does. So, Travis, like I said, it's been a long time coming, but the Metro has always been on my mind over the years here. So I cannot thank you and your team enough for making sure that we got to do this, put a spotlight on the conference, and do it at a time which is perfect as you move forward from the MAAC into the Metro in the present and the foreseeable future for you and your members.
Well, I appreciate the time, and I hope this becomes more of a regular thing and we can get together more often.